Hi, everybody. So I'm very happy to introduce Steve Keen, Kathleen Tyson, and Michael Hudson in our monthly lectures of David Graeber Institute. And I'm handling to Professor Steve Keen to introduce the guests.
Okay, well, very quickly, I'm known as a leading critic of neoclassical economics, which I regard as a bunch of myths that should have been chucked in the garbage bin at least a century ago. Michael, I think a lot of you would know, is someone who's got not just a foot in economics, but a foot in archaeology as well, knows the history of money better than anybody on the planet, I would argue. And Kathleen is somebody who, whereas Michael and I talk about central banks, Kathleen used to work for a central bank, has designed large parts of the actual financial system herself, and as well as that, is a critic of the financial system in the way it's been particularly used by America. So those are the three speakers here, and I don't know who to start with on this front. I wasn't expecting to be MC here. But the basic topic is the impact of globalization. I think, Kathleen, we might lead off with you because you have a very novel interpretation of the impact of Trump's behavior on the level of globalization. You're muted, Kathleen. Oh dear. Now you're okay. Now you're okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Right. Well, I became very concerned early in this decade that the changes that were coming were not expected widely enough in the West, that the world was moving towards a new monetary order, a new trade order, but that would largely exclude the United States and Europe and the United Kingdom. And I don't think policymakers anticipated that. So in 2023, I published Multi-Currency Mercantilism, the New International Monetary Order, which attempted to explain what was happening and why, with the thesis that the dollar was going to lose primacy, and, well, it wouldn't lose primacy, but it would lose hegemony globally as countries shifted to other currencies, especially their own and their trade partner currencies, which they call local currency trade in the BRICS and in ASEAN. And that's now universal policy for 80 countries. So that movement is happening. It's happening much faster than many people expected. Certainly trade in yuan is much faster than expected. But also countries are moving payments out of banks that use SWIFT and onto payment systems that are directly connected to currencies that they prefer. So, for example, SIPs cost 97% less than SWIFT to use. And so not unexpectedly, a lot of transactions for trade with China have moved onto the SIPs platform, the China Interbank Payment System, yay. But also Russia and China, because of sanctions on Russia, have 98% of their trade is now in their own currencies. So ruble has actually been outperforming this year as a very strong currency. And holdings of US treasuries are declining among foreign holders, particularly among foreign private holders, because they frankly just don't need as much dollar liquidity now as they did 5 years ago. And also the risks of holding US assets because of sanctions and freezes dissuade them from holding a lot of value that could be seized or frozen. So all of that's happened, and then Trump comes back, and obviously the chaos of the last year, the unpredictable policies, everything being determined unilaterally without consultation, without negotiation, is rapidly forcing even allies to reconsider their position in respect of trade and in respect of currencies and respect of credit. And security, because the offer for 80 years has been, you invest in our treasuries, you use our dollar, and we'll protect you. But clearly that's not quite the same deal in 2026. So that's where we are. It's all happening at speed, and it's very interesting to watch. We do need to build a bunch of new infrastructure. I will be trying to do that.
Mm-hmm. And Michael.
Well, unlike Steve, I haven't spent, I try to spend as little time as possible debunking neoclassical economics so that I can spend my time explaining what was real classical political economy all about. Because neoclassical economics is anti-classical economics. It's a counter-revolution against the whole attempt by finance capitalism to free economies and to free its markets from economic rent, from landlordship, from monopolies, and above all, in the end, from privatized banking that was unproductive and imposed a rent overhead, a rentier economy on the rest of the economy, making it uncompetitive. And this is the whole idea of modern gross national product, is that the bankers, when they charge late fees and interest, are actually producing a service. When monopolies raise prices, they're providing a surplus. When absentee landlords buy property and raise rents, that's creating an actual product. And that product is all in GDP. So I am criticizing the concept of GDP that is sort of the pretense that there's some actual empirical statistical comment to neoclassical economics. And then, like Professor Dyson, I've spent a lot of my time starting on Wall Street, working for banks, looking at international debt, and realizing that the key to the new kind of imperialism is not the military imperialism of classical European countries, but financial imperialism. And I wrote my book, Super Imperialism, on this topic in 1972, and I followed it up with Global Fracture in 1978 on the new international economic order. Well, as Kathleen says, the new international economic order is really a financial order, and that's why that's where our interests overlap. Just as, of course, my interests with Steve overlap, and we've worked together for much over a decade, going around the world to various conferences. So my field is debt, especially the international debts, which is what I first worked on Wall Street as Chase Manhattan Bank's balance of payments economist. And the job was to see how much debt service can other countries afford to pay so that we know how much we can lend them. And our objective, the objective of American banks, is to have the entire economic surplus of other countries paid in the form of debt service to international banks and bondholders. That's my main theme, and it's been the basis of my books on the modern economy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll throw my little spanner in here, and my focus, as Michael pointed out, has often been on critiquing neoclassical economics, mainstream economics. I see it as a bunch of very elaborately developed and intricate myths, which have all been disproved and should have been thrown out. If we were lucky, should have been thrown out a century ago. At the absolute least, it should have failed 60 years ago, and it's still with us today, leading to mythical ideas about how the economy should be managed. And all of this comes down to actually promoting trade and saying trade is better than self-sufficiency. This is quite a common theme in neoclassical economics. And if you look at everything is about how we can increase trade, and that's going to increase GDP, and that's what we're all on the planet to do. The whole role of humans is to increase GDP, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the theory of comparative advantage, which is the foundation of the argument that trade actually increases welfare, is something that I intend taking on this year. I finally worked out how to write a dynamic alternative to it. But as part of that, I went back and I decided to reread Ricardo just to see what he said. And I saw something that nobody else has seen ridiculously for over 2 centuries in Ricardo's justification for the theory of trade. And to go back to what that began with, and this is where, in many ways, globalization as a concept of something good came from. Ricardo argued that if countries focused on what they were comparatively better at rather than absolutely better at, the total level of output of the planet would increase, and we'd all share in the increased number of goods and services created by specialization. And that's been the one-trick pony of neoclassical economics ever since. Now, the weakness in this argument, which myself and and Michael, and I'm sure Kathleen as well have been as aware of, they talk about capital as if you can interchange between financial capital and physical capital. Now, financial capital can obviously be used for a range of different purposes, including extortion, but let's not go there right yet. But you can use financial capital to buy a blast furnace. You can buy a semiconductor plant with it, et cetera, et cetera. It's completely fungible. The fallacy in economic theory is to treat physical capital as being the same thing, treating it as if you can decide to specialize. And then what happens is that England stops producing wine. That was Ricardo's crazy example, and just produces cloth. And Portugal stops producing cloth and just produces wine, and the total sum of the two increase. And the argument that Ricardo used for that was in terms of number of workers involved. Now, I've just spotted, and I've said this has been unseen for two centuries, in justifying his argument. He said the reason it works in international trade and not domestic trade is that it's extremely easy, as we all know, to move. It's extremely difficult to move capital between countries. But he then said, and it is easy to move capital from one province to another in the same country. Now, he wasn't talking about geography. He was talking about moving capital from one industry to another. But it's ridiculous to imagine you can turn a sheep dip into a wine press. And even Ricardo couldn't bring himself to say it. So the person who gave us this focus on specialization knew he was pulling a con job, because to specialize, you've got to move machinery from one place to another. And if you can't, you lose productivity, because you have to trash the machinery in doing it. This, ironically, is what gave rise to Donald Trump, because the people who voted for Donald Trump were the people who lost their jobs in manufacturing and now live in the Rust Belt. They feel alienated and broken away from the Democrats. And that's a major reason why Trump was able to win the presidency for the second time. But now what we're seeing, and this is Trump's behavior, he's even more than America has done in the past, he's weaponizing the dollar, weaponizing the payment system. And that is an extremely good reason to move away from the Americans, which is what we're seeing the rest of the globe do. And the different thing about this time round is that America used to be the largest economy on the planet. It is no longer. It's far from the fastest growing economy on the planet. So the countries that are moving away from the American system are doing a non-United States dollar globalization. And that's the thing which is, I think Americans have been caught by surprise, is how rapidly their defective system is being replaced by one that doesn't have the political and imperial biases of the system they created.
Well, I also spent the early 1970s teaching international trade theory at the New School for Social Research in New York. And like Steve, I focused on Ricardo's theory. And all you have to know as to what junk economics it is in his case of wine produced by Portugal and raw materials produced by other raw materials producers, Portugal was the winner in not industrializing. Well, of course, we know that's not the case. And the basis of free trade theory and the mathematics underlying it is that all countries tend to become more equal, and equal in rent, equal in income, equal in wealth. Well, the real tendency, as we look at statistics, is under free trade, economies polarize between the trade surplus countries that protect their industry and have a mixed public-private economy, and raw materials producers, where the British colonial system, and followed by British creditors, that bankers that lent money to newly independent countries in the 19th century, prevented from protecting their industry and prevented from creating their own money. And so already right after Ricardo, his theory is in a way a declaration of economic war against other countries that do not have a balanced public support to free economies from the landlord class, from the monopolies, and from the financial class. Ricardo was the parliamentary spokesman in England for the banking class. So obviously he wasn't going to include in his theory of international trade the whole role of debt. And what we see now, looking at the whole rest of the world, and this is what Kathleen has emphasized, is the rest of the world is in deepening trade deficit that is financed by running into deepening debt to the creditor countries, which are protect their industrial core. And the result is there are more and more of their balance of payments and their own domestic government budget is spent on paying debts to foreign countries. And countries like the United States don't have much problem really in paying their own foreign debts because their debts are in their own currency. But as Steve often points out, you can't create money to pay debts in a foreign currency. That's the problem that Germany had after World War I. It had reparations debts that it had to pay basically in dollars. It paid dollars to Britain and France and other allies of America to pay their inter-allied debts, and they couldn't pay out of francs or sterlings or their own currency. And so you have this inability to pay the foreign debts that accumulate to basically turn your governments into collection agents for the international banking and bondholding class instead of developing their own self-sufficiency in agriculture, in industry to feed themselves, and a balanced economy such as the Western economies have. And one of the reasons that countries are withdrawing from this international order today is the international order has become very U.S. centered. And all that was brought out certainly this last weekend at the Munich Security Conference, where the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said, we're now rejecting the whole United Nations principle of having to pay attention to other countries and having to let them tell us what to do, like telling us Americans to stop global warming, when our whole foreign policy is based on control of the oil industry in order that we can turn off the power, the electricity, and the gas for heating for other countries if they don't accept our way of organizing world trade and finance. Well, this is, I think, the common denominator that all three of us have discussed, and the result of the United States overplaying its hand and saying we're going to replace the whole body of international law that's been developed over the last 4 centuries with a U.S. ruler-based order. We make the rules. There really aren't any rules, but at any given moment of time, they're what Donald Trump or whoever else is the spokesman for these rules that are going to put America first. So you're seeing the world today finally fracturing along lines that were talked about way back in 1950s at the Bandung Conference of non-aligned countries in Indonesia, and the whole attempt to create a new international order back then, again in the 1970s, all of that was unable to achieve a critical mass. But today, the global South, and especially in conjunction with China, Russia, India, and Iran, have enough power to become self-sufficient, not to become dependent on the United States and Europe anymore. For the first time, they're able to design their own economic order and basically emulate what the Western countries did to get rich. Take the allocation of money and credit as a public utility into the public domain, make the government the creditor, not permit the financial sector to make money by impoverishing the economy, but only to create productive credit, not to permit a absentee landlord class and a predatory financial class, and to turn the economies into special monopoly privileges and impoverish economies. That's the whole, this was the fight of classical economics in escaping from feudalism. And today's fight by the global South and the BRICS is trying to protect themselves from the American You could call it neo-feudalism, the American attempt to turn the whole world economy into a tributary system.
I'm just going to say a lot of that resonates. Strangely, back in the 70s, when I was in high school, I wanted to be an international lawyer and renegotiate the third world debt. That was my big ambition. Instead, I went to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and ended up globalizing the US dollar. Well, we can
You're
still
making
fix
amends
it.
now.
Yeah.
Well, that's where both
not,
of us learned what's wrong with the system and how inequitably it operates.
It is inequitable, but it did sort of work through the 90s. And it really was only, I think, 2000, well, for me, 2003 was the turning point, because I thought the Iraq War was unforgivable. I knew it was coming in 2002. I did what I could to try and influence policymakers not to do it, but obviously I failed. The only one that listened was Vince Cable, and he voted against it. He was a Liberal Democrat politician here in the UK. So lost that battle. But since then, I have been looking to how we can fix the world, make it better going forward. And that does mean moving away from dollar, moving towards currencies in which you have a natural flow because of trade relations, where you're accumulating them and you've got a trusted long-term trade partner, and moving credit into currencies where it's going to do more good at less cost. I mean, China has been really robustly and growing global credit in renminbi. And it's going to be very, very interesting to watch the reset in the IMF special depository right next year, because the two main features in the existing formula, if they follow it, they may not, they might just ignore the formula. But if they follow it, the two key characteristics for the weighting are trade, where obviously China's number one, and international credit use of a currency. So by growing they've been buying dollar debt from countries and substituting renminbi debt. And that instantly brings down the debt service for the country, because renminbi interest rates are lower than dollar for most creditors, but also means that countries stand a chance of earning those renminbi in an assured, repeatable way through trade. So through exports to China, which is obviously the biggest importer on the planet. So all of that is happening in real time, very quickly, and it's fun to watch.
Well, the problem is that RMB currency, and hence debts that have to be paid in RMB currency, is rising against the dollar. So even though the interest rates are lower, the cost of paying RMB at low interest is rising relative to dollar. And if countries earn their export proceeds in dollars for their raw materials that are priced in dollars, then this actually squeezes them even more. So I don't think that the current debts can be paid simply by reforming a system. I think you have to have an overall debt cancellation of the global South debt. And I think that's even more urgent right now, even before next year. If you have a war in Iran and oil prices soar, this is going to push the balance of payments of global South countries, no matter what their debts are, way into deficit. And it's the global warming that is increasing is already causing droughts and crop failures that are making them more dependent on agriculture and food. So the food deficits and the energy deficits they're facing force them a choice. Who are you going to put? What are you going to put first? Our own economic survival, or paying foreign creditors? The IMF and America is very clear. Put foreign creditors first, especially dollar bondholders, and put your own economy last. That's what really is issue, I think, in the global fracture that we're seeing now.
Do you know what? I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic. I was in Egypt at the end of 2024, in December 2024. My wonderful eldest son took me for a week in Egypt. Brilliant. The biggest surprise for me was out below Aswan when we were going, like 5:30 in the morning, going through the desert. And I was, that's an irrigation rig. And so I asked about it. And then just in 2022, they made a policy decision to start growing their own food because of the events in Ukraine. Egypt had been very dependent on Ukraine for grain. And now they're increasing their agricultural production by over 20% a year. Very rapid clip. They're using the modern technology for agriculture that's come out of China. China's got 8% of the world's arable land, about 18% of its population, and it still manages to be food self-sufficient. So it's now sharing that technology, sharing that education with the global South. Egypt is already on a path to producing more food than anybody would have thought possible. Again, you've got a positive case in Burkina Faso, where Colonel Traore, who we've tried to assassinate 33 times now, has increased the economy by 22% by localizing refining of gold, localizing processing of food like tomatoes into tomato paste, and localizing crop production so that their crop production is increasing rapidly. So it's not quite as hopeless.
So I think I'm very pleased to hear about that about food, because one of the main points that I've been making to political parties when I get a chance to talk to them, some of them in the UK, is that the challenge that global warming is going to throw our way, and it's going to happen, I think, in the next decade, is that at some point there's going to be global famines, because the impact of global warming is going to be so disastrous on our current production systems that they're going to collapse at some stage. No, you can't tell which one's going to go, because like Ukraine and Russia are major grain exporters, so is America. The climate crisis that, first of all, generates the result that those countries won't have enough to export food. You can't say what it's going to be. You can say it's going to happen. And in that situation, if you're a food importer, you're screwed. If you don't have domestic capability to produce food, and you suddenly find the exports that the exporting countries used to rely upon are no longer exporting because they're hanging on to what food they have for their own people, then that is going to cause the breakdown of any society that can't feed its own people. And I didn't know that China was quite self-sufficient. I know that it's been working in that direction. I'm glad it's there. But to take the UK imports at least 40% of its food. And if there is a global famine, then one of the first countries to suffer from that is going to be the UK. And this means that the damages that people are expecting to only affect, pardon me being blunt about this, but brown people, are going to affect white people instead. And that, I think, will be the biggest wake-up call that people who are skeptics about global warming have ever had, when it tends to be white people who start starving to death rather than brown people. But absolutely, we have to have food self-sufficiency. Making that an object of international trade is incredibly dangerous.
Food security is national security. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, the next crisis won't just be brown people, because Europe's
exactly, and that's
level of debt and their dependence on imports of fertilizer, imports of energy, are huge. And Europe is in probably the worst position right now, because they've got terrible policymakers. They don't make good, rational policies, and when they sanctioned Russia and cut off Russia's gas, they increased their own energy costs by 35%, forcing deindustrialization of literally thousands of companies that were doing very well before. You mentioned if war kicks off with Iran, that doesn't just have implications for the global East and the global South. Europe and the United States would also suffer mammoth shocks from, let's say, $150 oil. And they're not in a position to sustain those shocks either.
Well, the problem is not only the imports that the global South countries have. It's their exports. The single central core of American foreign policy after 1945 was to prevent other countries from being self-sufficient in food. And this became apparent in the World Bank. I wrote a whole chapter of this in my book, Super Imperialism, and that actually was the first chapter that I wrote. The World Bank refused to make any, if you read its country reports, every report says the country has to do just what you've been saying, Kathleen, to build up their food self-sufficiency. And that requires a whole system of agricultural provision of seeds, agricultural education, marketing systems. But the World Bank said, we will only make loans for plantation agriculture. And if any country entails land reform, we will destroy that country. Guatemala tried in 1953 land reform. The United States killed its leaders and had a revolution, a counter-revolution, and installed dictators. Throughout Latin America, the U.S. installed dictators with the specific aim of stopping land reform. And surprisingly enough, one senator in America, Senator Smathers, had a Marxist economist, my mentor, Terence McCarthy, design a World Bank for economic acceleration that was all based on promoting agricultural self-sufficiency, which required family-based farming, just like in the United States, and in food grains to feed itself, not to compete with tropical plantation products that would compete with each other to keep their products low. So you'd have countries like Chile with the most fertile land in the world in the form of guano, of all the birds that have flown over its mountains for thousands of years, having the lowest farm productivity in Latin America because of its plantation agriculture and its the failure of its government, socialist as well as capitalist, to modernize its agriculture. So this is this agricultural reform and the whole array of government services that you need to promote, what I guess you're describing for Egypt, is necessary for all of these countries. A whole system of having government-supported marketing systems, so you don't have the monopoly systems of marketing that you have in the United States by the big agricultural credit companies that are helping impoverish farmers. Agriculture in the U.S. is a disaster for its practitioners, and that's why Trump keeps trying to give it billions of dollars of more credit to hold the votes, because it's essentially become financialized and monopolized at the expense of farm production. And you could say that America provides an example of what other countries want to avoid in their development. It's an object lesson for all of this.
Well, I do think the rest of the world is cooperating a lot more towards those goals. I mean, one of the interesting things was 2020, I want to say whenever it was 2022 or 2023, when he made his State of the Union address, President Putin in Russia announced he was building 20 new universities, I think for 10,000 students each.
Yes.
And obviously that's not to serve the needs of his 185 million people, which already have plenty of universities. It's because he intends to educate the global East and the global South. And it's interesting on agriculture, when President Putin came to power, Russia was a net importer of food. And now they're the largest exporter of agricultural produce, because Putin took a look at the map, saw they had a lot of land, saw it wasn't being used for anything, and began farming on it. And that was a decision from the top that got implemented and has been hugely successful. And it is one of the stabilizers in terms of stockpiling food for a famine, is the Russian ability to outproduce. And China is also very big on stockpiling. It's one reason they have very low persistent inflation. During the inflation spike in 2023, while we were all hitting double digits, like 12, 13% here in the UK, China's inflation peaked out at 3.4% because they stockpile everything they could possibly need. Even going into war with Iran, which the US might do this weekend for all we know, China now has record stockpiles of oil that it can access to stabilize its economy. Very few other countries are that far-sighted. So China and Russia are now actively engaged in sharing expertise, sharing governance. China has a global governance initiative, and really giving the world more options. The word I like to use about what's happening now is optionality. That increasingly sovereignty is defined by optionality. Can you take choices that are in your best interest, independent of somebody else's direction? And so I'm very encouraged by the signs that optionality is being shared.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Russia's agriculture, because the great catalyst for all of this even was not so much Putin's decision to develop agriculture. It was the U.S. sanctions. The U.S. imposed sanctions against European countries exporting crops and agricultural to Russia. So that forced Russia to produce its own food. It began producing its own cheese and dairy products, replacing those from Lithuania and the Baltics, like Latvia. It forced it to essentially, the U.S. sanctions act is in the same way that protective tariffs acted. It forced countries to feed themselves, and because neither Russia nor other countries today are familiar with the whole logic of how protectionism and government subsidy actually help economies. Neoliberalism says that governments only play a retarding role, not that they are essential in regulating the economy to prevent financial and real estate and monopoly interests from taking over the government. Well, one of the first great critique of Ricardo's theory of free trade was by the lobbyist for the landlords, Thomas Robert Malthus, of population theory. And one of the best discussions to familiarize yourself with classical economics and the doctrine of industrial capitalism is Ricardo's correspondence with Malthus, where Ricardo said, well, the corn laws, Britain's agricultural tariffs, are actually raising the prices and they're stifling industry. And Malthus said, well, look at what happened in the Napoleonic Wars. We didn't have tariffs then, but Napoleon had a blockade against England. We had to feed ourselves. You had an enormous growth of agricultural productivity. If we continue to protect agriculture, landlords are going to make capital investments in land with government support of all the institutions, and we can feed ourselves. Ricardo said, no, we have to import from other countries, so they will import our manufactures and make Britain the workshop of the world. And with that world trade, that's going to be a bonanza for the financial sector that whose main market was financing foreign trade and foreign currency dealing. I mean, that's the political setting for all of this theory, that any economic theory is a reflection of the particular economic interests of the class that's supporting it. And the class supporting industrial capitalism at its takeoff was greatly productive. The class of the financial sector and the real estate sector late in the 19th century that opposed it was the disaster that Steve Keen spent so many books exposing.
It's intriguing. I mean, I saw a comment, I've forgotten the actual author, but saying that globalization has gone from being your liberator to your oppressor. And America's done that very much by weaponizing its currency, which it was doing well before Trump. Of course, what Trump does is bring in the person who's weaponizing your currency is now a mafioso boss. and with dementia, and probably syphilis as well. Obviously, I have no plans to go to the States in the next 3 years. But this craziness now is, I think, really the end of the American hegemony, because the post-war system was really a case of United States taking the mantle of empire from the UK and saying, now that we're the international currency, we're going to use our international powerhouse, we're going to use our currency for international trade. And what that did was dramatically strengthen the financial interest that Michael focuses so much upon. It made the American financial sector incredibly powerful, but it also made the American manufacturing sector weak, because with an overvalued dollar, they lost the dominance they got during World War II, where they were the leading manufacturing power. You don't become an imperial system without a strong manufacturing sector. But if you then become the international currency as well, your currency gets overvalued, and you therefore can't compete with your vassals, one of whom will ultimately develop the capacity to outdo you in manufacturing prowess. That's what America itself did to the UK during its period of industrial growth, when it, as Michael knows very well, you did that behind protectionism. That was America's industrial takeoff in the 19th century. Then England found itself outdone by the Americans. The Americans insisted on getting the dollar being the international currency. And I call that the curse of empires, because once you've done it, your empire gets weakened. You can't compete with your vassals in terms of manufacturing. Ultimately, one of the vassals comes along and replaces you. We're now seeing that happen with China. And so I think this really is one of those periods of history where there's a change in the interregnum, that's just change in who rules the system. And America's going down and China's coming up. The trouble is, we've never had such a recalcitrant and schizophrenic empire in history as we have with the Americans. And God knows what they're going to do. And the great problem, of course, is we've never had the power hegemon of the planet having a capacity to destroy the rest of the planet. And unfortunately, America does have that power. And we're now seeing how foolishly it's throwing that ridiculous weight around.
Well, Steve, I agree with you that, and with Kathleen, that Trump is indeed breaking up the American world order and empire. Isn't it interesting that it's Trump that is isolating America and breaking this up the empire, forcing other countries to become independent? It's not that they're reading your books and my books. They didn't develop their own theory. It's the United States that is pushing them into this, and now they're having to reinvent the wheel. Well, we've tried to give them the wheel and show that it's already been invented 2 centuries ago, and was rejected by the way in which industrial capitalism has turned into finance capitalism. But so far, they're just reinventing it almost without any review of all of the history of thought that you and I have talked about.
Oh, I'm not sure that that's entirely fair. I think Europe has a particular problem in that they don't invite new thinking, and they don't look outside their own borders for best practice. So that even though there are obviously better ways to do things, they'll just appoint a committee in Brussels and impose a suboptimal solution across Europe, whether it works, whether it hurts, or whether it helps. And to me, so that means Europe is a particular problem, because philosophically they tend to be more ideological. They're not pragmatic. I mean, my favorite economist, who I love deeply, is Charles Goodhart. And it's because Charles actually calls himself an economic historian and is pragmatic. He wants to know, is this going to work? And he recognizes that in complex situations, and particularly in crises, you have to maybe think a little differently. I don't see enough of that. I have an artifact here, which I keep on my desk. And it goes back to when I was at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York before we went insane. This is the case that made America insane and sanctions mad. It's Securities Exchange Commission versus Lee. And the New York Fed actually drafted an amicus brief against Washington against the Securities and Exchange Commission to try and maintain the principles of not universalizing the dollar. To actually say that a bank account in Hong Kong by a Singaporean citizen only exists in Hong Kong, even if it's in US dollars. Well, we lost that case. And that's when OFAC and FATCA became a huge global industry of accountants and lawyers, generating more and more sanctions, more and more restrictions on trade, more and more restrictions on using dollars. And really, had a different outcome been decided by a judge in 1987, maybe we wouldn't be here today. Maybe dollar would still be king. But as it is, we now have a sanctions industry, which basically has become one of the biggest lobbyists in the West. They're never going to stop. And so the rest of the world is recognizing that, is seeing that as a problem, is ready to move on, is ready to collaborate. And I think we'll find that it happens surprisingly quickly and surprisingly peacefully. Because my thesis is that not only do they move to local currency trade, but they pacify. They're not actually very desirous of being constantly at war. Mm-hmm. So yes, we can go in every now and then, do a decapitation strike, kidnap a president, as we did with Maduro, bomb a country here and there. But fundamentally, I think most of the world is ready to move to a more peaceful, collaborative framework.
That was one thing I enjoyed about Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum. It was really the first time that you had a leader just saying what a farce it was to call the current system rule-based, because the rules were always opposed in a biased fashion. And equally, I mean, I've always been a critic of the American dollar being used for international trade. We should have gone with Keynes's model, which was using an international unit of account. There was not going to be any national currency involved in international trade. That's what we should have got. But what we've instead had is the chaos of using the imperial country's currency for international trade, which has led to a breakdown in the international, in that current country itself, in terms of its manufacturing prowess. And I just hope that out of this chaos of having Trump in charge, there's some possibility to go back to a system which isn't a loaded one, which was the idea that Keynes put forward in the very first place, that no national country, whether it's a tiny country or the dominant economy on the planet, can actually bias the trade system in its favor and turn trade into a weapon, which is what, of course, Trump has done. In many ways, he's giving the coup de grace to that flawed system. So if there's any benefit out of Trump being president, it might be ending the international financial system that America distorted way back in 1944 when it insisted on using its currency for international trade rather than Keynes's idea of a neutral unit of account.
I'm not in favor of any synthetic currencies.
It's not a currency, though. It's a unit of account. It's synthetic. I give it that. But it's a unit.
After the games that they played resetting the SDR in 2022, which was supposed to be reweighted in 2020, but they said, oh, pandemic, we'll delay the reweighting. And then 2 years later, they reweighted it, keeping sterling in it. Sterling should have fallen out. We don't have trade. Nobody does credit in sterling. We should have fallen out under the formula, but they somehow rigged it to keep sterling in. I suspect because if sterling had dropped out, it would have been South Korean won or Hong Kong dollar that would have come in. And they didn't want another Asian currency. So, I mean, the reweighting in 2027, when it will be, to me is going to be the litmus test of, is it viable to have any synthetic unit of account that can't be rigged? Because my guess is they will rig it again.
Yeah, I think it's easy to rig an international system when there's a dominant currency involved than when there isn't. And that's why I'd prefer to go to something neutral, which I think was Keynes's idea. Reading his documents, I think he was aware that being in the international currency is actually a curse, not a spoil of empire, but a spoiler of empires. So, and I still feel that a huge part of the chaos of the last 80 years has been because the American currency was used for international trade. That's, let alone America being as imperial as it's turned out to be. The fact that its currency made it even worse.
It worked until the 90s. It worked all the way through the 90s. And then the United States went mad with monetary policy, with economic policy, with sanctions policy, and things spiraled. You had the dot-com boom and bust, and then you had the global financial crisis and bust, and then, all of that. But, when I was building the infrastructure that gets used today, and, some of it's much bigger than I expected. There's 22 trillion now in Clearstream in assets in custody, global securities. CLS Bank has, it averages about 3.5 trillion a day in foreign exchange settlements in 18 currencies. But it peaked 14.5 trillion. So, these are big numbers and big plumbing. You don't replicate those in the global economy overnight, but I built them once, I can build them again. So we can build them and probably build them better. Because obviously technology now is 25 years further along and improving at record pace. I did a central bank system, the Reserve Bank of India platform, which was commissioned in 2013, 2014. It globalized all of Reserve Bank of India, the largest central bank on the planet with 135,000 staff, 26 offices, very diverse systems where everything was done on paper and signed twice and stamped, onto a fully real-time, transparent, cloud-native, modular, interoperable platform that any bank would be proud to run. And I took that and I globalized it to 14 more central banks because I thought it was the biggest technology miracle of my lifetime. So I'm actually quite positive that we can do things, get things done, but we do have to build some new infrastructure. One of the things I've realized is when I modernized Clearstream in the 90s, both the governance and the operations and the risk management, I didn't think of it as a gatekeeper. When I built CLS Bank, first of all for the G20 founding banks, and then for IBM as the domain expert on the design, I didn't think of it as a gatekeeper. Now I look at Clearstream and I see it's a gatekeeper. It keeps other securities out to give preference and dominance to G7 because their assets are holding up the whole debt-based global monetary order. I look at CLS Bank and I see a gatekeeper. They haven't allowed a new currency into CLS since Hungarian forint over a decade ago. So to me, those are gatekeepers. They're keeping the rest of the world down. They're keeping the rest of the world out. So yes, we need to build some new infrastructure, but we know how to do it. I know how to do it. And it's possible to build it better and more robust than we built it 25 years ago.
But it needs international agreement to do that. And we back after World War II, we had that sense of goodwill. I think Trump is giving us a sense of bad will to get away from that bad behavior, to say we should actually produce something that is not biased and uses SWIFT, for example, is another.
You don't need international agreement. You don't need a new treaty. You don't need any new laws. We didn't have a treaty. Set up a system and let people join. We didn't have a treaty to modernize Clearstream. We didn't have a treaty to build CLS Bank. We just built them and then scaled them according to market demand, according to bank interest. And it worked. So it's, now those are kind of mature. And as I say, they're now gatekeepers, preserving and upholding the existing system. But we don't need a new treaty or any new laws or governments telling us what we can do to build a new system that meets an existing need, an urgent need, and have banks adopt it. They'll do it.
Just create it and get away from the chaos of the current system.
Build it, they will come, especially if it's in sanctions-free jurisdiction.
Indeed, yeah. On that, I have to leave for another live stream starting in 5 minutes, so I better leave, and I'll leave you two to continue conversing there. So good to see you both.
Good seeing you again, Steve.
Okay, and see you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
So maybe we should take some questions.
Oh, we've got some. I've got one here. On tariffs, if the courts conclude that tariffs were imposed illegally, what does this tell us about executive power in trade policy? And in today's fragmented global economy, do tariffs genuinely protect domestic industry, or do they mostly redistribute costs to consumers while serving as geopolitical bargaining tools? Right. I actually, after the Supreme Court struck down Trump's tariffs today, on the basis that it was inappropriate use of the emergency powers under IEEPA, I went back and I looked up Stephen Moran's paper from October 2024, in which he first proposed resurrecting tariffs using IEEPA and segregating the world into friends, neutral, foes, to use tariffs to punish people we don't like and reward people we do like. And so Moran is clearly going to get all the blame for this now. And he's now secure of a seat at the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. So that's going to be interesting to watch. But clearly 90% of the costs of tariffs, which are a tax, it's money that goes to the government, it's a tax. 90% of the costs in the United States in 2025 was borne by the US. It was borne by US importers. It was borne by US consumers. So yeah, it's a cost on the US economy, not on foreign economies. It did restructure foreign trade because countries like China decided, wow, that's crazy. I'm going to go get some new customers somewhere else. And they went around the world very aggressively marketing and growing their trade, so that the United States' share of Chinese trade is now down to about 7% of their exports, while their trade with their Belt and Road partners in particular is growing in double digits. So tariffs were a shock. The world reacted to them. How we unwind the last year, now that the Supreme Court has ruled, is going to be really a test of the constitutional system in the United States. Because as you know, Trump used unilateral presidential authority, using emergency powers to force through the tariffs. And now the Supreme Court, another branch of government, has stepped in to strike them down. Obviously, we don't know what happens tomorrow. One to watch.
Well, I think Trump has made the entire world the U.S. Enemy, not just dividing it into friends and enemies. I don't think there are any friends for Trump. Look at his most the harshest tariffs and the givebacks he's demanded are against America's allies, Western Europe, Japan, and Korea. I think tariffs do have a productive role to play, especially for the global South countries. It has to protect its agriculture, just as America protected its agriculture in the 1930s, to modernize its agriculture under the President Roosevelt's Agricultural Adjustment Act. Global South countries need to prevent America's subsidized grain and other exports from swamping the markets and preventing farmers from making a profit. So in that sense, productive tariffs nurture, I won't say an infant industry, but enable domestic economies to achieve self-sufficiency. That was the logic of America's industrial protectionism, when it was industry that it was protecting against the British domination of industry. And despite the fact that tariffs increased the cost of living for the economy, they provided the industrial capitalists with enough money to invest in factories and machinery and develop markets and make America into the industrial power that it was today. Same thing that Germany did. And I think that if we seem to agree that agriculture and food self-sufficiency is absolute necessity for global South countries, the same thing goes for tariffs. What's bizarre about Trump's tariffs is that he's hurt American industry. The effect of Trump's tariffs is to destroy America's industrial production. And above all, by the 50% tariffs that he's imposed on steel and aluminum imports. Well, everything industrial is made out of steel and aluminum. And I don't think the Supreme Court decision even dealt with these particular imports. But by raising the price of American industrial cost of production without transforming the whole institutional economy, without definancializing the economy, tariffs by themselves cannot create a profitable industrial environment for other countries to meet the quotas that they promised Trump that they would invest in the U.S., $750 billion for Japan, $350 billion for Korea. They've already said that they can't possibly afford it. Now that Trump is not allowed to impose the tariffs on them again, now we'll see whether they're going to say, well, now we don't have to give you any give back. So we don't have to give the subsidy of investing in your country and de-investing in our own country. German industry doesn't have to relocate here. Trump is the tariffs are really destroying American industry, just as Trump has essentially declared war on the American economy with his support for the rentier 1% at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah, we come to the. No. Do you guys want to continue? We come to the end of our hour, and I'm really grateful for both of you to come. Really thank you, Kathleen, to joining us, and hope you can join us again. So this is such a crazy moment in our history. It's absolutely unbelievable what's going on. For me, grew up in Soviet Union and see how U.S. is what is it doing? It's just fascinating. And my friends in Kenya now, they're saying about the same. How strange is that? how is it like really never thought in their lifetime that they will see this? And I think, Michael?
That was fast, fast hour. I'm glad to have met you, Kathleen. Your reforms seem very plausible. I wasn't familiar with them. I'm glad you're working on that area.
Oh, well, happy to send you a book. And I'm a big fan of
please do. I'd love it. I will read it.
If you drop me, I have your email. If you drop me a postal address, I'll pop it in the post.
Okay.
It's a quick read, and it has no citations because it's being written in real time in 2023. So I just used Twitter memes as citations and cartoons. But it was meant to calm things down. So I try to continue to be optimistic, even though some days it's hard.
Well, one of us has to be.
Yeah,
it's very hard to be optimistic, but that's why we're here for. We have to figure out how to continue live in this world.
Oh, and Michael, now that I can travel visa-free, I'd love an invitation to China.
Well, I'm not in China. I'm in New York, and I'm immunocompromised, so I don't travel anymore.
Oh, no. Oh,
so
what a shame.
My wife and I don't even go out to restaurants.
Oh, what a shame.
The COVID thing. I mean, my whole Chinese team has got COVID. The Hong Kong team got COVID going to Beijing, and I'm just afraid. So many of my friends have got COVID, and they're suffering from long COVID, not just COVID, but really long COVID. And it's just I see how some of my closest professor colleagues have just stopped being productive because of it. So I'm frightened to travel.
Okay.
Maybe we should go to the studio.
However, I'll try to arrange a discussion between you and me for my Chinese colleagues. They have the discussions, they record them, and they circulate them. I will do my best after I get your book to figure out what's the best topic for a mutual discussion.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, now we wrap up, but we can continue talking in the backstage. So we're not online now, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah?
All right.
Perfect.